We got too comfortable with our closest friend and ally, with the United States. No one in a million years would think the guy named President Trump would come along and start an economic war with his closest friend and ally, not to mention, with the rest of the world. And the rest of the world goes back and kisses behind all the time. Oh, yes. We aren't going to do that. We're going to fight like we've never fought before because we're Canada. We're resilient. We have the best workers in the entire world.
That is Ontario Premier Doug Ford, and the tell in there, of course, is right at the end when he didn't say on the best workers in Ontario, he said the best workers in Canada. James Mennie is on the line over at the Montreal Gazette, and Jim, you have alluded to this before. Again, it seems like Doug Ford's got his sights set on something bigger than the being the Premier of Ontario.
Absolutely, and I find it amazing that, what we're hearing, this clip, you trust me, folks, if you go on CPAC and you look at the press conference he gave in Hamilton today, this guy knows how it's done. He may be a populist politician, but he's very, very good at it. And he is saying out loud the things that we would like to hear our politicians say about specific topics, specifically Donald Trump, specifically the tariffs. He went after the head of the U.S.-based steel conglomerate that owns Stelco in Hamilton, and this guy apparently is an admirer of Donald Trump, and he basically says, I got a real problem with this guy. Now, this is not the kind of thing you usually hear from provincial premiers,
right.
But it goes on. He goes, and a guy like Trump, the only thing he understands is strength. He goes, we should be hitting him twice as hard. So help me, Aaron. Maybe I have watched too many movies in my life, but I'm asking myself, why is the Premier of Ontario channeling Sean Connery in The Untouchables, right? He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. I mean, he's not fooling around. And I guarantee you, he knows that every single reporter in that room was nodding and smiling because they know he just handed them 5 or 6 different leads, easy to write, easy to produce, and by all means, people will gobble this stuff up. So that said, if it happens that the rumors begin to sort of like go out, especially given that Monsieur Poilievre is undergoing a leadership review in January, if the rumors start going out that maybe Doug is interested in a change of scene, a change of venue, I think it'll be thoroughly welcomed. As it is, and I know he is loathed by the opposition in Ontario, and he is accused of all kinds of problems and ethical issues, and indeed perhaps legal issues. But the bottom line is this guy knows how the game is played. I guarantee you that whether you live in Montreal or whether you live in Vancouver or whether you live in Saskatoon, when you hear a politician talk like that, you will slowly but surely end up finding yourself nodding and perhaps murmuring yes as he speaks.
With respect to his ambition here, and you brought this up before, Jim, right? This idea, especially now, given Pierre Poilievre is going to be back in the House of Commons, and given the fact he won that by-election. Did you happen to catch him today going on about the Air Canada flight attendants and how the Conservatives or the Liberals stole their idea or didn't vote on the idea that they would have had?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard the clip. I heard the clip in the newscast. And I find that interesting. First of all, I find it interesting that I'm hearing it today, as opposed to in the middle of the strike. But it's also, and I hate to put it this way, Aaron, between lineup editors and assignment editors, who do you think is going to get bigger? Whose quotes do you think will get bigger play in the latest newscast? Is it going to be Doug, for the rest of the country anyway? Yeah. Is it going to be Doug Ford or is it going to be Pierre Poilievre?
Sure. Going to be Doug Ford because, hey, Doug Ford is Doug Ford, and to hear him say that, I guess, going to catch a lot of people by surprise, and maybe in a good way. I will point out, by the way, not to dwell on this, but, we talked about Pierre Poilievre before. When he went on about this Air Canada, the flight attendants, and he felt the need to point out that, when he travels, and he travels a lot by plane, and then added the part about when I'm sitting in economy, I just thought, you know what, that's just such a perfect Pierre Poilievre moment, but then again, I digress.
And remember, we live on a planet where everyone's got a phone, so, buddy, you better fly economy for the rest of your life.
In case someone has a picture of him in business.
No
Good
kidding.
point, yeah. All right, from that, what else you want to talk? You want to talk about Mark Carney being in town today?
Well, actually, I really want to talk about this Léger poll, Aaron. It's one of the rare instances where a survey has bad news for everyone. even the Parti Québécois, they're at 35%. That's an increase of five points. And indeed, the suggestion by the pollsters is that the Arthabaska by-election, they're getting all kinds of coverage, so that made them more popular. They're up by 5. Meanwhile, and this is big news, I think, for our listeners, is that the Liberals have dropped 2 points to 26% since last June, and even more significantly, and I don't believe they've done anything in particular, but they also managed to drop by 1 point in terms of Francophone voter support. So they've gone from a total of 18 to 17, and I'm very sorry. At this point, Aaron, we have a new leader. He was chosen, Monsieur Rodriguez was chosen in June. And yet I'm not seeing the Liberals even coming close to breaking out of the perception that they are slowly but surely devolving into the Liberal Party of Western Montreal. These numbers are not good. The Coalition Avenir Québec, they stayed put at 17%, and I'm sure that we'll have all kinds of excuses from François Legault, but I'm telling you right now, Aaron, he's gone. He cannot, these numbers are not going to change. He's got no right. There's no rabbit big enough to pull out of a hat that's going to save François Legault as premier or the Coalition Avenir Québec as a government. Éric Duhaime, 14 points. That's kind of a drop to say the excuse me. That was he dropped from 14 to 10, and I think the writing's on the wall for Éric Duhaime. You can't blame the guy. He worked very hard. He campaigned hard. But I don't. The magic's not there, and maybe someone else should do it, or maybe they should rethink the party entirely. And as for Québec Solidaire, 9%, they're on life support now. And as I say, the Bloc Québécois, 35%, they're leading. It's a huge bunch. But all that said, support for sovereignty, 36%. So once again, the more popular Monsieur Saint-Pierre Plamondon becomes, the bigger the stakes, the more questions one would assume. In the short term will be asked, how can you reconcile your popularity with an option, a number one option for your party that nobody or most people don't want to have?
I will point out, Jim, and again, I'm just thinking we see this happen every year. It's the summer, July, August, nobody's in the National Assembly, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
I think once we get back in there, you got to wonder if Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is going to start beating his chest a little. I mean, these numbers are good, and they're very good for him and for the PQ. And I wonder if this raises his profile in there, because without Éric Duhaime in there, because he lost, all of a sudden we're going to start to see a whole lot more of the PQ.
Absolutely. And what I find interesting as well, and you're right, it's the middle of summer, but you know what, as we've also said in the show, there are no more doldrums anymore. There's, believe me, like it or not, and we saw that from the turnout in Arthabaska, people are paying attention to what's going on with politics. The fact is, for the time being, this latest poll, who would be the best premier of Quebec? Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon at 26%. Yeah. Pablo Rodriguez, 10 points behind at 16%. And as I say, with the numbers that we have and the demos that we have with the Liberal numbers, they have not budged. They are stuck on the island of Montreal. And I got to tell you, I know it's more than a year, but the clock is ticking. And once people get this ingrained idea that, this is the government, the PQ is the government in waiting, and it doesn't look like, the Liberals are doing grand chose. And I tell you right now, Aaron, before you have a bunch of cabinet or Liberal shadow ministers on, or Rodriguez himself, please spare me. If they come on and say, well, if a vote against us is a vote for separatism, people have heard that 78 RPM record for the past 50 years. It ain't going to fly, especially when people realize with all these successive PQ governments that in the end, if they have to stand back from a referendum, they will. So I'm really hoping for the Liberals, at least, that they perhaps maybe look out the window, see what's going on, and perhaps change their style.
Tell me what you do think about Mark Carney being here. We didn't know what the itinerary was going to be today, other than he was meeting with Valérie Plante. We'll meet later with François Legault. Anything to be taken from this specifically, do you think?
I think it's a courtesy call, because that was the first question I asked. Why? It's usually when the mayor of Montreal, any mayor of Montreal, meets with the Prime Minister of Canada, it is because the Prime Minister of Canada happens to be in Montreal on something else, and it would be untoward if the Prime is there that he or she not meet with the mayor, which is what I think happened. I mean, when we hear Madame Plante basically say, well, we both think that housing is a priority, well, no kidding. But quite frankly, you're limping and quacking. I want to hear from the next mayor of Montreal about how he or she is going to get along with the Prime Minister of Canada. We don't know where that's going to land just yet, and we don't know exactly the nuts and bolts of what a housing policy or indeed any other policy will be.
Yeah.
But I didn't look at this as being some sort of deep symbolic thing, especially given that to a certain extent, Madame Plante has already checked out as mayor.
By the way, we are waiting. We had no confirmation that he might stop by the show. It's not happened yet, but we're holding out hope that Mark Carney may come by.
Tell him you're going to have Doug Ford on. I mean, it doesn't have to be true.
Good idea. Yeah, a little late. I should have thought of that myself. Listen, before I let you go, I started the show by asking the question. I will do this when we get done here. This fight between Christian Dubé and the doctors and him not wanting to back down on Bill 106 and them saying, well, this is unfair, pay for performance. What do you think about this? I mean, is it time for him to back off or not?
Listen, if I have something wrong with my health, I don't see Christian Dubé, and neither do any of our listeners. So I think the bottom line is, whether we like it or not, and certainly when it comes to dealing with nurses unions or nursing associations, we've already got a bias in favor of the nurses. But quite frankly, when the minister responsible for health seems hell-bent on painting Quebec's physicians as a bunch of money-grubbing villains, I think there's an issue here, a problem here, and the problem is for us.
James Mennie at the Montreal Gazette. Thank you, Jim.
Matt.